Every detective knows that not all betrayals are fueled by greed or ambition. Sometimes they're rooted in something far more sinister, love, or at least the twisted version of it that leads to shattered lives, broken hearts, and, in this case, an unspeakable crime. This case was different from anything I had seen in my career. It started innocently enough with a missing persons report. Emma Foster, a loving wife and mother of two, had vanished. No sign of struggle, no goodbye note, just gone. At first it seemed like another case of someone needing to get away from it all, but the more we dug, the darker things became. I was called to her suburban home, a picturesque house that looked like something out of a magazine. Her husband, David Foster, was distraught. He told us she had gone to meet a friend for coffee and never returned. The kids were confused, too young to grasp what was happening. Their innocence made the situation even harder to bear. David seemed like the perfect husband, devoted, supportive, and willing to do anything to find his wife. But in my years as a detective, I'd learned that the people closest to the victim often have secrets of their own, and David was no exception. As we began interviewing Emma's friends, one name kept coming up: Laura Hastings, her closest confidant. They said she was more than just a friend. Emma trusted her with everything. So naturally, she was one of the first people we brought in for questioning. Laura appeared calm, maybe a little too calm for someone whose best friend was missing. She repeated the same story David had told us. Emma was supposed to meet her for coffee, but she never showed up. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation when I asked about Emma's marriage. And that was when I knew there was more to this story. The deeper we delved into Emma's life, the more we uncovered. It seemed her perfect marriage wasn't so perfect after all. Rumors began to surface of late-night arguments, secret phone calls, and an affair. But with whom? That was the question that lingered in the air. David insisted he knew nothing of any affair, but I wasn't convinced. Men like David, with their clean-cut image and friendly demeanor, often hide the darkest secrets. The more he denied knowing anything about Emma's extramarital life, the more my gut told me he was lying. But Emma's affair wasn't with a stranger. It was much closer to home. As we sifted through her phone records and emails, a name popped up over and over again: Laura. Their conversations weren't just friendly chats. They were intimate, emotional, and filled with tension. The kind of tension that builds when two people are involved in something forbidden. It all began to unravel. Emma's disappearance wasn't just a random act of violence. It was personal, rooted in deceit and betrayal. Laura wasn't just Emma's confidant. She was her lover, and that changed everything. We confronted Laura with the evidence. Her calm facade crumbled as the weight of her lies came crashing down. She admitted to the affair, but insisted she had nothing to do with Emma's disappearance. According to her, they had been planning to leave their respective partners and start a new life together. But Emma had gotten cold feet, and that was the last time Laura saw her. It was a compelling story, but it didn't add up. If Emma had cold feet, why would she vanish without a trace? And why hadn't Laura reported any of this sooner? The more we pressed, the more inconsistencies emerged. Laura's timeline didn't match up, and there were gaps in her story that she couldn't explain. But without a body or solid evidence linking her to a crime, we were stuck in a frustrating limbo. David, on the other hand, was spiraling. His public persona remained stoic, but behind closed doors, he was unraveling. He grew increasingly agitated with the investigation, lashing out at reporters, detectives, And even his children, it was as if he was hiding something, and we were getting closer to discovering what. Then came the breakthrough. Emma's car was found abandoned on a remote road several miles from her home. Inside, we found traces of blood, enough to suggest foul play, but not enough to determine whether she was alive or dead. It was a devastating blow, but it gave us a new lead. We retraced Emma's last known steps, piecing together her final hours. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed her car leaving the area with someone in the passenger seat. The footage was grainy, but it was enough to confirm our suspicions. Emma wasn't alone when she disappeared. The question was, who was with her? Was it Laura, or had David somehow lured her away under false pretenses? The investigation took a darker turn as we realized we were dealing with more than just a missing persons case. This was a crime of passion, fueled by jealousy, betrayal, and desperation. The plot thickened as we dug deeper into David's finances and personal life. Behind the mask of the loving, grieving husband, there were cracks in his perfect facade. He had been living beyond his means, and recent business ventures had failed. The financial strain was starting to show, and there were whispers of embezzlement from his company. David was under pressure, professionally, financially, and personally. Could it have driven him to do something drastic? We couldn't rule it out. But even with his mountain debt and a crumbling marriage, was he capable of murder? We also couldn't ignore Laura's involvement. She had motive, a deep emotional investment in Emma, and she had been caught lying about their affair. But she still maintained her innocence, claiming she had nothing to do with the disappearance. It was a tangled web of lies, deceit, and manipulation. Both David and Laura were hiding something, and it was up to us to figure out what. As we pored over the evidence, we stumbled upon a crucial clue, something so small it could have easily been missed. Hidden in Emma's personal journal was a cryptic entry, written just days before she vanished. It hinted at a confrontation, someone close to her who had threatened to expose her secret. But who was she talking about? We brought David and Laura back in for further questioning. This time, we played them against each other, using the journal entry as leverage. The tension in the room was palpable, each of them growing more defensive, more agitated, as we closed in on the truth. And then it happened. Laura broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to the confrontation. She had begged Emma to leave David, but Emma refused. In a fit of rage, Laura threatened to expose their affair, believing it would force Emma to choose her. But instead, it drove Emma further away. But did that confrontation lead to something darker? Laura swore she didn't harm Emma, but her guilt was obvious. The emotional weight of the affair, the lies and the secrecy, had taken their toll. But was it enough to drive her to murder? Laura's breakdown gave us more insight into the twisted dynamics of their relationship, but it still didn't provide the answer we needed. If she didn't harm Emma, where was Emma? And why had she left without a trace? We decided to follow the trail of financial records more closely. If David's financial strain was as severe as it appeared, perhaps money had played a larger role in Emma's disappearance than we initially thought. We subpoenaed the financial records for both David and Emma, diving into every transaction for the past year. What we found was startling. David had taken out a large life insurance policy on Emma only a few months before she went missing. The payout was substantial enough to wipe out all of his debts and leave him with a sizable sum. Was this just a coincidence, or was this part of a larger, more calculated plan? David, of course, denied everything. He claimed the policy was nothing more than a precaution, a responsible move for any husband and father. But with his crumbling financial situation, it was hard to believe. The timing was just too perfect. Then a new lead emerged. A local security guard who worked at a construction site near where Emma's car was found came forward with vital information. On the night of Emma's disappearance, he had seen a man matching David's description in the area, driving a vehicle that resembled David's. It was the break we needed to place David near the scene. We confronted David with this information, but he remained calm, almost eerily so. He explained that he had been in the area for a meeting with a client, and that the security guard must have been mistaken about the time. His alibi was shaky at best, and with the mounting pressure, his once cool demeanor began to crack. While all eyes were on David, we continued to investigate Laura's role in this tangled web. Even though she had broken down emotionally, her involvement still raised questions. She had everything to gain from Emma's disappearance. If Emma was out of the picture, Laura would be free to live her life without fear of the affair being exposed. But Laura's emotional state made it hard to believe she could have orchestrated something so complex. She was a woman who had been pushed to the brink, yes, but a cold-blooded killer. That didn't seem to fit. The pressure was mounting on both fronts. David was growing more defensive with each passing day, and Laura was emotionally unraveling. But without concrete evidence linking either of them to Emma's disappearance, we were still stuck in a frustrating limbo. We needed a breakthrough, and fast. That breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma's best friend from college, whom she had kept in touch with over the years. When we contacted her, she provided us with an email Emma had sent just 2 weeks before she went missing. The content of the email was startling. In it, Emma had confided in her friend about her fears for her safety. She had mentioned that both David and Laura were becoming increasingly controlling and possessive. But what really stood out was the last line of the email. "I don't know who I can trust anymore." This cryptic message painted a picture of a woman trapped between two people who both claimed to love her, but had their own dangerous agendas. Emma had been caught in a toxic love triangle, and now it seemed she had feared for her life. This new information brought us closer to the truth. But there were still gaps in the story. If Emma had feared for her life, why hadn't she gone to the police? And why had she left without telling anyone? The answer lay in the emails. As we combed through more of her correspondence, we discovered that Emma had been planning to leave town, to start over somewhere far away where neither David nor Laura could find her. She had been saving money in a hidden account, slowly building up enough to escape. It was clear now that Emma had felt cornered. She was planning to disappear long before anyone could get to her, but something or someone had stopped her before she could make her move. We began to look at the timeline more closely. Emma had withdrawn a large sum of money from her secret account the day before she vanished. It was enough to suggest she had been preparing to leave. But why hadn't she gone through with it? What had changed at the last minute? David, for all his faults, had a clear motive. The life insurance payout, his crumbling finances, his increasingly erratic behavior, it all pointed to a man who had everything to gain from Emma's death. But Laura's emotional state couldn't be ignored. The desperation in her voice, the guilt in her eyes. Was she simply a heartbroken lover, or had her obsession with Emma driven her to do something terrible? As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, we knew we were on the verge of a breakthrough. We just needed one final piece of evidence to tip the scales in one direction or the other. Then came the most chilling discovery yet. Emma's body was found buried in a shallow grave in a remote wooded area just outside of town. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head, and the time of death aligned perfectly with the night she disappeared. This was now officially a homicide investigation. The discovery of Emma's body brought a new level of intensity to the case. David and Laura both became prime suspects, and the media frenzy surrounding the case grew louder by the day. The town was gripped by the tragic end to what had once appeared to be the perfect suburban family. David was brought in for questioning again, and this time he was visibly shaken. The calm, composed facade he had maintained throughout the investigation was starting to crumble. He denied any involvement in Emma's death, but his alibi didn't hold up. The security footage from the gas station, combined with the witness testimony from the security guard, placed him near the scene of the crime. But Laura's reaction was just as telling. She was devastated by the news of Emma's death. But there was something else, something darker. She confessed to the affair again, but her story remained the same. She had nothing to do with Emma's disappearance or murder. Yet her emotional unraveling made it hard to believe she wasn't involved in some way. As the evidence mounted, we prepared to bring the case to a close. But just when we thought we had it all figured out, a new twist emerged, one that would turn the investigation on its head. That twist came in the form of a forensic discovery. A trace amount of soil found on Emma's clothing didn't match the area where her body was found. It was from a completely different location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place that hadn't been active for years. This small but crucial detail led us to believe that Emma had been held somewhere else before being killed and buried. We searched the warehouse and uncovered more evidence, a set of footprints, some bloodstains, and a fragment of Emma's clothing. It became clear that this was the scene of the initial crime, not the woods. This discovery reshaped our theory of the crime. Emma had been lured or forced to this location, possibly by someone she knew, and it was here that she was killed. Both David and Laura's alibis fell apart. Neither of them could explain their whereabouts on the night Emma was likely killed. David had lied about his whereabouts during the critical time period, and Laura had no one to corroborate her story. We brought them both in for further questioning, and it was clear that the pressure was getting to them. Then Laura cracked. In a tearful confession, she admitted that she had been at the warehouse that night. She claimed that she had gone there to confront Emma, to try and convince her to leave David once and for all. But things had escalated. According to Laura, an argument had broken out, and in a fit of rage, she had pushed Emma. Emma had fallen, hit her head, and died almost instantly. Laura insisted that it was an accident, but the evidence told a different story. Emma's injuries were consistent with multiple blows, not just a fall. Laura's story didn't add up. David, on the other hand, remained cold and calculating. Even when faced with Laura's confession, he denied any involvement. But the mounting evidence against him, including the life insurance policy, the financial motive, and his presence near the crime scene, painted a different picture. It became clear that this was more than just a crime of passion. David and Laura had conspired to get rid of Emma, each driven by their own selfish motives. Laura had wanted Emma out of the way to pursue her affair with David, and David had seen an opportunity to solve his financial problems. But in their haste to cover their tracks, they had made too many mistakes. The forensic evidence, the witness testimony, and their conflicting stories all pointed to one conclusion. They had both played a role in Emma's death. As we prepared to make the final arrests, we received one last piece of the puzzle. A neighbor had come forward with a recording of an argument between David and Emma that had taken place just days before she went missing. The recording, taken from a security camera near their home, revealed the extent of the tension between the couple. In the recording, David can be heard threatening Emma, telling her that if she ever tried to leave him, she would regret it. This chilling threat was the final piece of evidence we needed. David had been planning Emma's murder for some time, and when Laura entered the picture, she became the perfect accomplice. Together they had plotted to get rid of Emma, but in the end, their own greed and paranoia had led to their downfall. We arrested both David and Laura on charges of murder and conspiracy. As the case went to trial, the town watched in shock as the once respected couple's dark secrets were laid bare in the courtroom. The affair, the financial ruin, the life insurance policy, it all came out, and the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. David and Laura were both found guilty of Emma's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The media frenzy that had surrounded the case finally began to die down, but the scars left on the town and on Emma's family would remain for years to come. Looking back on the case, it was one of the most complex and emotionally charged investigations I had ever been a part of. The twists and turns, the betrayals and lies all made it feel like something out of a crime novel. But this was real life, and the consequences were all too real. Emma had been a victim of two people who had lost sight of their humanity. David, consumed by greed and desperation, and Laura, blinded by obsession, had both played a part in her tragic death. In the end, their love affair had turned deadly, and they had both paid the price for their actions. This case reminded me of the dark side of human nature, how easily love can turn into something dangerous, how quickly trust can be broken, and how some people will stop at nothing to get what they want. It was a stark reminder that even in the quietest of towns, beneath the surface, there can be secrets waiting to explode. But as difficult as this case was, it also reminded me why I became an investigator in the first place. To seek justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves, to uncover the truth no matter how deep it's buried, and to bring closure to the families left behind. As I wrap up this story, I want to leave you with something to think about. The case of Emma's murder was a tragedy, but it wasn't an isolated incident. Every day, people around the world are caught up in toxic relationships, blinded by love or trapped by fear. Sometimes, those relationships turn deadly. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you feel unsafe, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or anyone, don't wait until it's too late to get help. There are people out there who can offer support, and sometimes just talking to someone can make all the difference. And if you've been following this case, you know how important it is to stay aware of the people around you. Pay attention to the warning signs, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to speak up if something feels wrong. Thank you for listening to this story, and remember, if you enjoyed this case, there are many more to come. Subscribe to my channel to stay updated on the latest investigations, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Stay safe, and I'll see you on the next case.